My dear friends, the Gospel that we have heard speaks of both providence and power, and also foreknowledge and wisdom. It takes me back to 1986, when with some 7,000 people from all over France and other parts of Europe, awaiting another 7,000 the following week, we were at Ars, a place already sanctified by miraculous power and all the gifts in the person of the Curé of Ars, Saint Jean-Marie de Vianney, and he was already there, as it were, marched unto glory, but leaving a trace of his presence, notably that he had taken God seriously with very poor human means. That was the same power that was to be found when we were there, and which had been there the year before, and which they were sharing about while we were there and before getting there. And it came at one point to casually sharing what had happened in this specific area of nourishing 7 plus 10, that is 14,000 people, without any means of knowing exactly the number who might be coming from all over Europe. And without any fee. It was all basically done by gambling on Providence, who would not let them down. So they had got together a fairly large number of bits of food, e.g. chicken legs, to nourish these thousands of people. But the number that turned up the previous year had been far in excess of the number calculated, and therefore they were in trouble. But the Lord was not. And what did they do? They carried on distributing these chicken legs just as they had started. And they noticed after a certain point that they were still coming from the source, that is to say, that they were being multiplied and created ex nihilo before their eyes. And indeed, it did not stop there. To show his abundance of generosity and to honor them for honoring him, for it was all in his glory, that it was so abundant that even after the session, they gave out the excess to all the nursing homes of the area. All perfectly good food. Why should it not be? Because the Lord himself made it. And such miracles have happened all across the Christian centuries. In the life of the Curé of Ars himself, there was at least one case which comes to mind immediately of the orphelinat, those orphans that he had care of, and I think it was called La Providence. That was out of food, and I forget the details, but the long and the short of it was that he sent Catherine, whoever it was, Lasagne, to look what was going on there, and she found, lo and behold, the granary full of food, that is, grain that the Lord had actually created, because there was no other means. It had come ex nihilo, from nothing. The Lord, therefore, directly intervening, because he was the only resource. There is also one story, less known, but actually quite authenticated, in the life of Thérèse of Lisieux. Again, the details do escape me, but there was a case of dire poverty in her life, either with regard to the Carmel or other things related, but I think it's probably the Carmel itself, that there was nothing to eat, and it actually happened there as well. There was a miraculous multiplication. And then it stopped when the actual normal sources started to come again. And since the session that I'm talking about was organized principally by the Community of the Beatitudes, still called the Lion of Judah in those days, they were very used to this phenomenon, because it happened quite a lot in their founding and so on. At that time they were founding at the rate of 2 monasteries a year. It was going all over Europe and the world. And the actual way in which it was happening was very interesting, because it was all based on a very contemplative element, adoration going on most of the time, and fasting and so on. There was always a presence before the Blessed Sacrament, at least in the day hours, and sometimes all night, e.g. all Thursday. And therefore it was very much glorifying the Lord and doing the work that divine providence actually gave them to do, often through bishops or whatever, as a filling up of the gaps for the Lord. Therefore it started in the right place and with the right optic. And therefore it was important that that prime mover was the Lord himself, and therefore the motivation for any gamble on his providence was grounded. And I remember hearing this testimony from a couple there with regard to the starting of a big operation in one of their houses, which was to be specializing in healing people who had psychological problems. There was quite a lot of people there involved in the medical skills, and therefore they were able to handle that. And they therefore needed a certain amount of equipment to do this properly in this house that was going to be dedicated to that particular ministry, and it was quite expensive. So they gambled on the Lord, and eventually they were kind of keen on getting this sum to pay the debt. So what did they do? They decided, okay, we'll kind of show that we're serious about this and we'll start to fast. And they decided as a community to fast until actually the sum came. Now that was something which the Superior General clamped down on. It was very imprudent because it was actually forcing the Lord's hand in a way which was not exactly polite. So there they were, and they were fasting, and in blind faith were quite confident that it would come. So there they were. They decided to clean the kitchen because it was not being used. Eventually the doorbell rang. They opened it. Maybe this is the answer. This lady came in, and there was a huge basket of some kind of fruit. And they thought, well, she doesn't know exactly what's going on here, so we'll give her our sincere thanks and put it there safely on the kitchen and not touch it. And so they carried on. And this was going on. And eventually they were getting somewhat hungry and somewhat spiritually cheesed off. So anyway, they thought, maybe we've been imprudent. So they carried on nevertheless, because they thought, well, the Lord will not let us down, we've taken him seriously. Eventually, the doorbell rang again, and this lady came and said, look, the Lord put it on my heart to give you this. Vous avez toujours besoin de sous. You're always in need of a few sous down there, so take this envelope. You see something. Thank you, my dear. Thank you for praying. And I came back. You see, all eyes, you see, were looking at this envelope in which their salvation lay. They opened it. Exactement la somme. The exact sum needed. It was a big one. To the last sou. So they thought, well, the Lord was there. However, the Superior General was not amused. But it does go to show, and it's a constant in the life of the saints, and even, one can say, all those who have taken the Lord seriously in a situation of duress, things happen. In fact, just the other day was buried a close friend of mine in Wales, and he had been in the war as a young man, and they were dying of hunger. There was actually no hope. The others in his band had given up hope, and they were just lying down to die. But he was the one in the little troop who was a good Catholic and prayed, and he was bombing heaven this time with Ave Marias. And he did not wish to lie down to die. He stayed awake and kept praying. But eventually he heard, as he looked over into the distance, into the water, this tiny chugging noise. So, with the poor means he had, he drew attention with all the energy that was remaining in his fasting body to draw attention to the fact that they were there. And he diverted them from their course, and they came, and they were all rescued. Otherwise he would not have been, therefore would not have been either the church that came out of him, because he was the main mover in founding a Catholic church there where we were in Wales, in the middle of a Protestant area, a converted barn essentially, but now a very beautiful church. And if one is that way inclined, one can actually look at this in some detail by modern means, because the advantage of our way of handling e.g. the cybersphere of today, is that we can actually have access immediately to other people's experience, and there are actually a few very powerful testimonies to this specific miracle there. And there is one, if anything, is slightly more puzzling. It's one where they were in a situation in Africa or somewhere where they were distributing by charity clothing which they got from Europe or the States, but there was no more. But they carried on nevertheless from the same source to distribute whatever they were, t-shirts and cardigans and all that kind of thing, and they kept coming out of the bag or bags, and it was actually before their eyes they realized this is not humanly possible. And the testimony is there by young people on YouTube. It's actually modern miracles ongoing. As the Old Testament would say, the arm of the Lord has not been shortened. Now, what is constant in all these and similar cases is that the motivation is the glory of the Lord, and the situation is human absence of means. What we can draw from it is this: it's important before we undertake anything to calculate the motive and to make sure that anything we undertake is coming from the true originator of any good work. Anything which starts from ourselves or is slightly contaminated by self-will or self-glory risks having a human effect, which can be quite disastrous. The other is that one actually does not think that we are in a situation of abandonment, even in a problem on a daily basis. The Lord sees the problem. He is also wisdom, and we have a share in that wisdom by participation, but only a share. Therefore, anxiety out of control is damaging, and something actually not coherent when it comes to a soul really living the life of grace, because it means that we are limiting God and we think almost that we are God. We do everything as though it depended on us, but aware that it does not. Therefore, there's a certain relaxation when we go through life. We take things as they come. And many people actually damage and even ruin their life by worry. I remember when we were students, we had a good chaplain in the first year. It was also the superior of the Carmelite house there when I was living at the time. It was a kind of seminary. And he was a man of God and also a very good chaplain. He was young and orthodox and very good for listening. And he picked out when he was listening to you what the problem was. But just before exams one day, he celebrated Mass in the girls' hostel actually, and he gave this homily based on St. Matthew. Do not worry. Now, it is a teaching given by the Lord himself. And what do we find in the context of that teaching? We find an invitation to look at creation, which is working perfectly well. Now, we think that we are, therefore, obliged to be worried to make things happen. Well, we can't do a thing, as the Lord points out, whereas nature does not worry and works perfectly well. In that sense, abdication over the cosmos gives us freedom. And there's one other thing which I would leave you with as well in that context. It's that one reason why we ruin sometimes our interior life and even crowd out the Lord from our prayer time is that we are trying to live tomorrow, today. And the Lord himself pointed out in that very Sermon on the Mount that sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. For looks at time, it's like the Lord handing time to mankind as a huge baguette of bread, but only in 24-hour segments. We can't digest any more. And a lot of our problems comes from the fact that we're trying to digest the whole baguette today. So, as we come now to the altar, let's remember that. This is only an anticipation of what we're doing here. Normally we can't see it, but the power is there. The same power that we're plugged into. And if we want something, this is the best time to ask for it. For actually we do have a power of the cosmos in prayer. And the most cosmic moment that we have on earth is actually at the foot of Calvary. right here.
O gentle, chaste, and spotless Maid, we sinners make our prayers to thee. Remind thy Son that he has paid the price of our iniquity. Virgin most pure, star of